The bells rang before dawn, as they always did, their iron voices carrying across the low stone roofs and into the fields beyond the village walls. Serafina woke to them with the same practiced stillness she had learned as a child, eyes opening without haste, breath held just long enough to remember who she was meant to be. Preacher's daughter. Obedient, unblemished. The narrow room was cold, the kind of cold that crept from the stones and settled into the bones. Candle stubs lined the sill beneath the small arched window, their wicks bent and blackened from last night's prayers. She rose, drew her woolen shawl tight around her shoulders, and knelt beside the bed before her feet touched the floor. The words came easily. They always had. Words memorized before she could read, spoken before she understood them, repeated until they lived in her mouth like something born there. Gratitude. Humility. Petition. Silence. She stayed kneeling long after the bells faded. It was not devotion that kept her there, not truly, it was fear. Her wedding was 3 weeks away. The thought sat inside her like a ticking thing, though no one spoke of time passing so crudely. Days were marked by bells and candles, by meals taken and prayers completed, by the slow stitching of linens and the careful copying of vows onto parchment that smelled faintly of ink and lambskin. Her father had written the vows himself. Serafina had watched him do it, seated at the long table in the chapel's side hall, his brow furrowed as if the weight of her future pressed directly upon his hand. He wrote with care, pausing often, whispering phrases aloud before committing them to the page. Each word chosen to bind, to seal, to preserve. Marriage, he had told her, not looking up, is obedience made holy. She had nodded. She had always nodded. The village had known her all her life. She had been carried through its stone streets as an infant, baptized in the cold water drawn from the old well, taught to read by candlelight while other children slept. The women spoke of her in softened tones, as if she were already a thing set apart. The men lowered their eyes when she passed. She had learned early how to keep her gaze lowered, how to still her hands, how to fold herself into the narrow space the world allowed her. It had been enough. It had always been enough, until the nights began to feel longer. Serafina dressed in the pale linen gown set aside for daily wear and braided her hair tightly, as her mother had taught her before she died. No loose strands, no vanity. The mirror-polished bronze, clouded with age, reflected a familiar face back at her, calm, plain, composed. She did not look like someone on the edge of ruin. The chapel was already awake when she arrived. Candles burned along the stone walls, their light wavering over carved saints and weathered scripture. Her father stood at the altar, arranging the vessels for morning service. He smiled when he saw her, pride softening his stern features. "You are early," he said. "I could not sleep." He studied her a moment longer than usual, as if weighing something unspoken, then he nodded. "Come. Sit with me before the others arrive." They sat together on the narrow bench behind the altar, the hush of the chapel pressing close. Outside, the village stirred, hooves on stone, murmured greetings, the distant clatter of shutters opening. "You know what is expected of you," her father said gently, "not just as a bride, as an example." "Yes," she replied, "you have been given much, structure, guidance, protection." His voice lowered. "Not all are so fortunate." She thought of the whispered stories she had heard since childhood. Of burned villages beyond the hills, of beasts that slept beneath mountains, of a king who ruled no land and answered to no council, dangerous by reputation alone. "I am grateful," she said, because gratitude was required. He reached for her hand, squeezing once. "Hold fast to what you have been taught," she promised she would. That night the sky was moonless. Serafina had gone to the chapel after supper, as she often did, to copy a final passage for the wedding rites. The ink was nearly gone, the letters growing thin beneath her careful strokes. When she finished, she sanded the page and rolled it gently, tying it with thread. She should have gone straight home. Instead, she lingered. The air inside the chapel felt close, heavy with wax and stone. She extinguished the candles one by one, leaving only a single flame near the door. Outside, the village lay quiet, wrapped in darkness broken only by the faint glow of hearth fires. She stepped into the night. The path home curved past the old bell tower and down toward the fields. She had walked it 1,000 times. Tonight it felt unfamiliar, the shadows deeper, the silence sharper. She heard him before she saw him. Footsteps, slow, unhurried, not approaching, parallel, somewhere beyond the low stone wall that bordered the path. Her heart stuttered, then quickened. "Who is there?" she called, her voice thin. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment nothing moved. Then a figure emerged from the darkness, just far enough for the faint starlight to catch on the edge of a cloak. Tall, broad-shouldered, still. "I did not mean to startle you," the man said. His voice was low, steady, unadorned. It did not sound like the voice of a thief or a drunkard. It sounded controlled. "You should not be here," Serafina said, backing away. "This is sacred ground." "I know." He did not move closer. "I will leave." Relief washed through her too quickly, too intensely, leaving her unsteady. She nodded, turning back toward the path. "You walk alone at night?" he added. She stiffened. "I always have." "That is unwise." The words were not a threat. They were an observation. Anger flared, brief and unwelcome. "I do not require counsel from strangers." Silence followed. Then, quietly, "Forgive me." She turned despite herself. He stood with his hands visible at his sides, head slightly bowed. His face was shadowed, but she could see enough to know he was not young. Lines marked his brow, his mouth set in a way that suggested long-held restraint. "You should go," she said again. "I will." He hesitated. "But you should know, there are things in this world more dangerous than wandering men." Her breath caught. "Such as?" He met her gaze fully then, and something in his eyes made her chest tighten. Not hunger. Not malice. Something deeper. Older. Promises made without knowing the cost. She recoiled as if struck. "How dare you?" she whispered. His expression did not change, but something like regret crossed his features. "I spoke out of turn." "Yes," she said. "You did." He stepped back, retreating into the darkness from which he had come. "May your path remain clear, preacher's daughter." Her skin prickled. "You know who I am." "I know enough," he replied. Then the darkness reclaimed him, though the sense of his presence lingered far longer than it should have. She stood alone on the path long after, the night pressing in from all sides. Her heart raced, her thoughts tangled and sharp. Stranger. Dangerous. Improper. And yet? Her hand rose to her chest, fingers curling into the fabric of her gown. Beneath them, her heart beat hard and fast, as if it had been startled awake. She hurried home, bolting the door behind her, lighting a candle with shaking hands. She knelt beside her bed, but the words would not come. When she closed her eyes, she saw him standing in the dark, unmoving, unthreatening. She heard his voice again, calm and steady, speaking of promises and cost. She pressed her forehead to the floor. This was temptation. She knew that. A test sent to measure her faith. She would pray harder, she would fast, she would confess the encounter to no one and let it pass like a bad dream. But as the candle burned low and the night deepened, a terrible realization took root within her. The fear twisting inside her was not fear of the man. It was fear of the part of herself that had listened. Chapter 2. Before the Wedding. The days that followed did not return Serafina to herself. Outwardly, nothing changed. The bells still rang at their appointed hours. The chapel doors still opened and closed with the same solemn rhythm. Women still nodded to her in the street, speaking of linens and bread and the weather, their voices warm with approval. Her father still looked at her with quiet certainty, as though the path ahead were already laid and could not be altered. Yet beneath that calm surface, something had shifted, subtle, persistent, impossible to unfeel. She began to notice the silence, not the familiar hush of prayer or the gentle quiet of candlelit evenings, but the spaces between sounds. The pause after footsteps passed, the stillness beyond the edge of the village at dusk. The way the night seemed to wait. She told herself it was nerves. Brides often grew restless, the older women said. The soul stirred before a great covenant. That was how they explained the sleeplessness, the sudden heat beneath her skin, the way her breath sometimes caught for no clear reason. Serafina accepted these explanations outwardly. Inwardly, she knew better. She had not seen the stranger again, not at first. Days passed without sign of him, and she scolded herself for the faint, unwelcome sense of disappointment that followed each uneventful walk home. She prayed for forgiveness for that alone. The wedding preparations advanced like an approaching tide. Each morning brought new reminders of what awaited her, the fitting of her gown, the careful discussion of seating within the chapel, the copying of her vows until her fingers ached. The parchment grew soft from handling, the words worn familiar, binding. She could recite them without looking. At night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the village settle into sleep. Sometimes she dreamed, nothing clear, nothing improper, only the feeling of standing at the edge of something vast, unseen, with no one urging her forward and no one calling her back. It was on the fourth evening after their meeting that she sensed him again. She had lingered late in the chapel, finishing a final task her father had set her. the candles were nearly burned down, their wax pooled thick at the base. When she stepped outside, the sky was bruised purple, the last light fading behind the hills. She paused. The air felt occupied. Her heart began to race before she understood why. "You need not hide," she said softly, unsure where the words came from. For a moment nothing answered. Then, from near the old yew tree at the edge of the clearing, he stepped into view. He did not approach, he did not bow, he simply stood where the light could reach him, his cloak dark against the stone. "I hoped you would not be afraid," he said. "I am," she replied at once. He inclined his head. "That is wise." The honesty unsettled her more than any charm might have. She folded her hands together, gripping them tight enough to steady their trembling. "You should not be here," she said, repeating the words like a charm. "Then I will leave," he said, as before, yet he did not move. The space between them felt charged, taut as a drawn string. "Why do you come?" she asked, hating herself for asking at all. His gaze lowered briefly, as if he weighed the answer. "I passed through this land. I did not intend to linger." "But you have," she said. "Yes." The admission carried no pride, no challenge, only fact. "You are not from here," she said, stating what was obvious. "No." The village lights flickered behind her. Somewhere, a bell chimed the evening hour. "You walk alone often," he said quietly. "I worried." She laughed, a short, strained sound that surprised them both. "You worried for me?" "I worried," he said simply. That should have frightened her. Instead, it warmed something she had kept buried for years. "You do not know me," she said. "I know what you are taught to be," he replied. "That is not nothing." Her throat tightened. "And what is that?" "Careful," he said. "Faithful, bound." She took a step back. "You speak too freely." "So do you," he said, not unkindly. Silence fell again, heavy and intimate. She became acutely aware of her own breathing, of the faint scent of earth and leather that clung to him, of the way his presence filled the space without advancing into it. "You should go," she said, but the words lacked force. "I will," he answered as always. She watched him turn away, retreating toward the shadows. Panic flared sharp and sudden. "Wait," she said. He stopped. The word echoed in the space between them, hanging there like a confession. She did not know why she had said it, only that the thought of him disappearing again felt unbearable in a way she could not explain. "Yes?" he said, not turning. Her pulse thundered in her ears. "If you pass through," she said slowly, "do so in daylight. The night invites misunderstanding." He considered this, then nodded. "As you wish." He left her then, truly this time. From that evening on, she became aware of him without always seeing him. A figure at the edge of the market, hood drawn low, a presence near the fields at dusk. He never approached her unbidden, never spoke unless she did first. That restraint unsettled her more than boldness would have. She found herself altering her routines not to seek him. She would never admit that, but to remain open to the possibility of crossing paths. She walked more slowly, lingered longer, told herself it meant nothing. Each encounter was brief, a few words, a shared silence. They did not touch. Once, as they stood too near beneath the fading light, she lifted her hand without thinking, then stopped herself, her fingers hovering inches from his sleeve. Her breath felt too loud in the quiet that followed. He noticed. She knew he did. Neither of them moved. Yet each meeting left her shaken, her thoughts trailing after him long into the night. She began to dread her prayers, not because she doubted them, but because they brought him to mind when she knelt in the quiet. "Do you ever regret obedience?" she asked him once, the question slipping out before she could stop it. He looked at her for a long time. "I regret many things," he said at last, "but obedience has never been simple enough to regret." "What do you regret then?" she pressed. He shook his head. "That is not a burden for you. You decide that quickly," she said, a hint of sharpness in her tone. "I decide it carefully," he replied. She felt seen then, in a way that frightened her. The wedding drew closer. The vows lay finished, the gown nearly complete. Each night she folded her hands and asked for strength, for clarity, for the return of her former certainty. Instead, she felt herself changing, subtly, inexorably. Not toward rebellion or defiance, but toward awareness, of herself, of choice. One evening, as they stood beneath the yew tree, she spoke the truth aloud for the first time. "I am to be married," she said. "I know," he replied. "In days," she added. He closed his eyes briefly, as if in acknowledgement of a blow. "Then I will leave before that day comes." The thought struck her like a loss she had not prepared for. "You should," she said, though her voice faltered. "Yes." Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. When he turned away that night, she did not call him back. She walked home alone, the bells tolling the hour above her. Inside her chest, something mourned quietly, not for him alone, but for the version of herself she felt slipping away. As she knelt beside her bed, the realization settled with terrifying clarity. She might not remain who she was raised to be, and she was no longer certain she wanted to. Chapter 3. The Truth Between Them. The morning the truth found her, the bells rang late. Serafina noticed it at once. The delay unsettled her more than silence would have. Bells were order-made sound, measured, dependable. When they failed, even by a breath, it felt like the world had slipped its tether. She stood at the chapel window, watching mist lift from the fields beyond the village. Her reflection wavered in the glass, pale and uncertain. 3 days remained before the wedding. 3. She folded her hands, pressed them together until her knuckles whitened, and whispered a prayer she had not been taught, not for forgiveness or strength, but for truth, whatever it cost. The village stirred slowly, voices carried, low and urgent. A rider had arrived before dawn, they said. A stranger, dust-covered and grave. He had not come to trade. Serafina felt the shift before she understood it. She found her father in the side hall, speaking with 2 elders. Their expressions were tight, their voices hushed. When they noticed her, the conversation ended at once. "What is it?" she asked. Her father hesitated. "There are rumors," he said carefully, "of a man passing through these lands, a dangerous one." Her breath caught. "Dangerous how?" The elders exchanged a glance. One of them crossed himself. "They say he is the Dragon King." The words fell like a stone into still water. For a moment, Serafina could not feel her feet on the floor. Serafina did not gasp, she did not stagger. She stood very still, as if any movement might shatter her. "That is legend," she said faintly. "So we hoped," her father replied. "But the signs, there are always signs," she interrupted, sharper than she intended. She swallowed. "Forgive me." Her father studied her closely. "You have not seen anyone unusual?" The question pressed against her chest, heavy with consequence. A single word could set the world back into place. A single lie could fracture it. "No," she said. The lie tasted bitter, unfamiliar. It did not burn as she had feared. It settled instead, cold and permanent. The elders nodded, satisfied enough. They spoke of caution, of closing gates at dusk, of prayer. Dragons were creatures of judgment, the old story said, harbingers of ruin, kings without mercy. Serafina excused herself as soon as she could. She did not go home. Her feet carried her beyond the village, past the fields and the low hills, toward the stand of ancient stones where the land rose uneven and wild. The air grew cooler there, the silence deeper. He was waiting, not hidden, not retreating. He stood beside one of the great stones, hands folded behind his back, his gaze turned toward the sky. He seemed almost carved from the place itself, still, enduring, burdened. "You know," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. He turned slowly. "Yes. You are the Dragon King. Yes." The admission was quiet, unadorned, no flourish, no denial. Her heart hammered painfully against her ribs. "There are stories," she said. They say many things," he interrupted gently. "Some are true." She took a step closer before she could stop herself. The ground beneath her feet felt solid, real. He did not recoil. "Why are you here?" she asked. His gaze held hers, unwavering. "Because I wish to walk where no one knelt." The simplicity of the answer struck her harder than fear would have. "You let me speak to you as if you were nothing more than a passing man," she said. "You let me. I chose not to frighten you," he said. "I chose restraint." The word resonated between them, heavy with meaning. "I should be afraid," she whispered. "You are," he replied, "just not for the reasons others are." She closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. When she opened them again, she saw not a monster, not a tyrant, but a man standing alone beneath the sky, bearing a name that had devoured his own. "Did you come for me?" she asked. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "No." The answer hurt more than she expected. "I came to pass through," he continued. "I stayed because I was unprepared for what I found." Her breath trembled. What was that? A woman who listened, he said, and a man who had forgotten how to be heard. The space between them felt suddenly fragile, as if it might collapse under the weight of honesty. "You should leave," she said again, though the words sounded hollow even to her. "I will," he said, "before your wedding." The certainty in his voice twisted something sharp and aching inside her. "Is that what honor demands?" she asked. he hesitated. It is what restraint requires. She laughed softly without humor. You speak of restraint as if it were a virtue freely chosen. For me, it is, he said. It must be. She studied him then, truly looked. The lines of weariness around his eyes, the tension held in his shoulders, as though he carried a weight invisible to others. This was no conqueror drunk on power. This was a man who had learned the cost of wanting. Have you ever? She stopped, uncertain. Go on, he said. Have you ever desired something you knew would undo you? His gaze did not waver. Yes. And did you take it? No. The single word rang with finality. Why? She asked. Because some lines, he said quietly, once crossed, cannot be returned from, and I have crossed too many already. The wind stirred, carrying the distant scent of smoke and pine. Serafina wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of the chill. You frighten me, she admitted. I know, but not as the stories say. A faint, sad smile touched his mouth. Stories are made to keep people safe. From what? She asked. From choice. The word echoed inside her, opening something she had long kept sealed. She took another step closer. He did not retreat, but he did not advance either. The space between them narrowed to a breath. If you are the Dragon King, she said, why do you stand here speaking to me as if I matter? Because you do, he answered without hesitation. The certainty in his voice unraveled her. She turned away, pressing her palm against the stone beside her, grounding herself in its cold solidity. Tears threatened, sudden and unwelcome. This is wrong, she said. Everything about this is wrong. Yes, he agreed. Then why does it feel like truth? He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was lower, stripped of its careful distance. Because truth does not ask permission, he said. It only asks to be born. She faced him again, her eyes bright. And what of vows? She demanded. What of faith? He bowed his head. I would never ask you to betray them. And yet you stand here, she said, knowing what you are. I stand here, he replied, because leaving without honesty would be the greater sin. The words settled between them, heavy and irrevocable. She realized then that he had never touched her, not once, not even when the temptation must have been sharpest. His restraint was not a mask. It was a choice renewed each time they met. You are alone, she said softly. Yes. The admission was barely audible. Something inside her shifted, painful and tender. Without thinking, she reached out, not to him, but toward the space between them, stopping herself just short of contact. So am I, she whispered. They stood like that, suspended in a moment that felt both fragile and immense. No touch passed between them, yet the intimacy was undeniable, a shared understanding, a mutual recognition of the line they hovered beside. At last, he stepped back. This must be the last time, he said. The words struck her like a farewell she was not ready to hear. I know, she said. He inclined his head, a gesture of respect, of sorrow. May your path be gentle. And yours, she replied. He turned away then, his figure receding among the stones. Serafina remained where she was, the truth burning quietly within her. She did not feel ruined, she felt awakened. And that frightened her more than any dragon ever could. Chapter 4. Breaking the Rules. The village prepared for the wedding as if certainty itself could be woven from routine. Candles were counted and recounted. Bread was baked in careful excess. The chapel floor was scrubbed until the stone shone pale and bare, as though it might reflect holiness back upon those who stood upon it. Serafina moved through these days like a figure half set in wax, present, composed, unmoving, while something within her pressed steadily against its confines. 2 days remained. She slept little. When she did, her dreams were spare and unkind, bells tolling without hands to pull the ropes, parchment dissolving into water beneath her fingers, doors opening onto rooms she did not recognize. She woke with her heart racing, the dawn light thin and unforgiving. She told herself she would not see him again. She repeated it during prayer, during chores, during the long hours spent fitting the gown that would soon be hers. The linen brushed her skin with deceptive gentleness. The women spoke softly, reverently, as if she were already transformed. You are so calm, one of them murmured, so ready. Serafina smiled because calm was expected. Inside, she felt as though she stood on the edge of a high place, the ground solid beneath her feet yet offering no comfort. The truths she carried about him, about herself, pressed closer with each passing hour. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the bells marked the end of day, she made a choice. It was not sudden, it did not arrive like temptation or impulse. It came quietly, with the weight of inevitability, as if it had been waiting for her to notice it all along. She wrapped her shawl around her shoulders and left the house without explanation. The path beyond the village felt different now, less like an escape, more like a reckoning. She followed the familiar route past the fields, past the old stones, toward the place where the land dipped into a shallow hollow ringed by ancient trees. He was there. She knew it before she saw him, as if some unseen tether drew her forward. He stood near the edge of the hollow, his cloak dark against the gathering dusk. When he turned, surprise flickered briefly across his face. Then something else, concern, resolve. "You should not be here," he said at once. "Nor should you," she replied. His gaze searched her face, taking in the tightness of her expression, the tension in her stance. "I told you I would leave. I know. I meant to," he said quietly, "but I could not depart without knowing." "That you were obeying your own rules?" she finished. He flinched, just perceptibly. "That you were safe," she laughed softly, the sound brittle. "Safe from what?" "From me," he said. The honesty disarmed her. She stepped closer, stopping a careful distance away. "You have never endangered me." "I have," he replied, "by remaining." The words hung between them, undeniable. "The wedding is tomorrow," she said, his shoulders stiffened. "Then this must end." "Yes," she agreed. The word felt sharp and clean, like a blade, but not without truth. He met her gaze steadily. "What truth remains unsaid?" She drew a slow breath, feeling it settle deep within her chest. "I am not here because you tempted me," she said. "I am here because I chose to come." He shook his head. "You are bound by vows not yet spoken." "And I am bound by silence already broken," she replied. "Do not pretend this is a matter of ignorance or coercion." "It is not." The intensity in her voice startled them both. "Serafina," he said, using her name for the first time. It sounded careful on his tongue. "If you take another step toward me, you will carry the weight of it for the rest of your life." "I already do," she said. The rain began then, light at first, a fine mist that darkened the earth and softened the air. She felt it on her skin, cool and grounding. "I was taught," she continued, "that obedience was the highest good, that desire was a failing to be corrected, that silence was virtue." He listened without interruption, his expression grave. "But no one taught me," she said, her voice trembling now, "what to do when obedience costs truth." The rain thickened, a steady whisper around them. "You should turn back," he said, though the words sounded more like a plea than a command. She shook her head. "I did not come to be persuaded." "What did you come for?" he asked. She met his eyes, holding the gaze despite the fear coiling tight within her. "To cross a line," she said, "not with my body, with my will." His breath caught. He looked away, jaw clenched, as if wrestling with something fierce and internal. "If you ask this of me," he said slowly, "you ask me to fail you." "I ask you to see me," she replied, "not as a vow to be protected or a rule to be preserved, but as a woman who knows what she is choosing." The rain soaked through her shawl, plastering it to her shoulders. She did not move to adjust it. She stood exposed, not in flesh but in intent. "I will not touch you," he said. "I will not take what is not freely, fully given." "I know," she said. "That is why I am here." He looked at her then as if seeing her anew, not as a fragile thing to be guarded, but as a force, quiet and resolute. "What do you want?" he asked. She swallowed. The words lodged in her throat, heavy and irreversible. "I want you to stay," she said, "tonight, not as a king, not as a threat, as a witness." "To what?" he asked. "To the moment I choose myself," she said. Silence fell, broken only by the rain. At last he nodded once. "Very well." They moved together into the shelter of the trees where the canopy broke the worst of the downpour. The hollow felt enclosed, intimate, as if the world beyond had receded. The air smelled of wet earth and leaves. They sat across from one another on a fallen log, careful not to touch. The closeness was its own trial. She could feel the warmth of him, steady and restrained, like a fire banked low. "Tell me," he said softly, "what you fear most." She hesitated, then answered truthfully. "That if I do not step beyond the rules now, I will live within them forever without knowing who I might have been." He nodded slowly. "And what do you hope for?" She closed her eyes briefly. "That I will not disappear." The simplicity of the confession stripped something bare between them. "You will not," he said with quiet certainty. She opened her eyes. "You do not know that." "I do," he replied, "because you are here." The rain eased, leaving the hollow wrapped in damp stillness. Time seemed suspended, unmeasured by bells or vows or expectation. She reached out then, slowly, deliberately, stopping her hand just short of his sleeve. Her fingers trembled, hovering in the space between them. "This," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "is as far as I will go." He inhaled sharply, his restraint visible now, taut and hard-won. He did not move to close the distance, he did not pull away. "This," he agreed, "is far enough." They sat like that, her hand suspended, his gaze fixed not on it but on her face. The intimacy of the moment felt almost unbearable, not because of what it promised, but because of what it refused. At last she lowered her hand. The choice settled within her, heavy and irrevocable. She had crossed the line she came to cross, not into transgression of flesh but into ownership of her own desire. "I will not ask you to stay beyond tonight," she said, "and I will not offer," he replied. They shared a quiet, sorrowed smile. When the rain finally ceased, the world beyond the hollow returned in cautious increments, the distant call of a night bird, the rustle of leaves, the faint glow of village lights far off. "It is time," he said. "Yes." They rose together. At the edge of the trees, he paused. "Whatever you choose tomorrow," he said, "know that it will be yours." She nodded, her throat tight. "And whatever path you take, I will carry this moment," he finished. As proof that restraint is not emptiness. He inclined his head once, deeply, not as a king, but as a man honoring a truth shared. Then he turned and walked away, his figure fading into the night. Serafina stood alone beneath the darkened sky, rain-soaked and steady. She felt no triumph, no scandal, only a quiet, unalterable shift within herself. She returned to the village before the bells rang, her steps measured, her heart strangely calm. For the first time in her life she had broken a rule not out of weakness but out of knowing, and there was no turning back. Chapter 5. Who She Became. The bells rang as they always had, measured, certain, unyielding. Serafina stood beneath their sound and felt, for the first time in her life, that they no longer governed her breath. Morning light spilled through the narrow window of her chamber, pale and deliberate, illuminating the simple space she had occupied since girlhood. The candle she had left burning through the night had guttered low, its wax pooled and hardened like something spent. She had slept little, but she was not weary in the way she expected to be. There was no panic in her chest, no frantic reaching for prayer to steady her hands, only clarity. Today was the day she was meant to become someone else. She dressed slowly, deliberately. Each familiar motion, washing her face, braiding her hair, tying the laces of her gown, felt altered, as if she were performing them with a new awareness of her own hands. The wedding dress lay folded on the bench, white linen edged with careful stitching, modest and precise. She touched it once, lightly. The fabric was cool beneath her fingers. For years she had believed that purity was something preserved by distance, by avoidance, by silence, by staying safely within the lines drawn for her. But standing there with the echo of the hollow still alive within her, she understood something quieter and more unsettling. Purity, she realized, was not the absence of desire, it was the presence of choice. She left her chamber before anyone came to summon her. The village was already awake, the air thick with anticipation. Women moved between houses carrying baskets of bread and flowers. Children whispered and stared. The chapel doors stood open, candles lit within, their flames steady in the morning stillness. Her father stood near the entrance, speaking with the elders. When he saw her approach, his face softened with relief. "There you are," he said. "I feared you had not slept." "I slept enough," she replied. He studied her more closely then, something shifting behind his eyes. "Are you well?" She met his gaze and did not look away. "I am." The truth of it surprised her with its ease. He nodded, reassured, or choosing to be. "It is nearly time." "Yes," he offered his arm. She took it, the gesture familiar, comforting. Together they stepped inside the chapel. The space glowed with candlelight. The stone walls seemed closer than usual, as though the building itself leaned inward to witness what was about to occur. The air smelled of wax and old incense and clean linen. She saw the man she was meant to marry standing near the altar. He was kind, steady, earnest. He had never frightened her, never raised his voice, never demanded more than was required. He believed, sincerely, that devotion was love, and that love was obedience shared. Once, she had believed that too. Their eyes met. He smiled, hopeful and unknowing. Serafina felt no hatred toward him, no anger, only a quiet grief for what he expected and for what she could no longer give. The ceremony began, words flowed around her, ancient and precise, vows spoken by rote, promises shaped long before either of them had drawn breath. She listened as though from a great distance, aware of the sound but not the pull. When the time came for her to speak, she stepped forward. Her hands did not shake. The chapel fell silent. She looked at the parchment her father held, at the vows written in his careful hand, each word meant to bind her future into something sealed and unchanging. Then she lifted her gaze. "I cannot," she said. The words were soft, but they carried. A murmur rippled through the chapel, disbelief swelling into shock. Her father froze, the parchment trembling in his grasp. "Serafina," he said, low and urgent. "You are afraid. I am not afraid," she replied gently. "That is why I must speak." The man before her stared, confusion darkening his expression. "You dishonor us," he whispered. She felt the weight of those words, acknowledged them fully. "I know," gasps echoed from the benches. A woman wept softly. Somewhere, a candle sputtered. Her father stepped closer, his voice strained. "Child, you do not understand what you are doing." She turned to him then, really turned, and saw not authority but love, burdened, fearful love that had shaped her entire life. "I understand," she said. "I have never understood anything more clearly." Silence pressed in, thick and heavy. "I was taught," she continued, her voice steady, "that obedience was righteousness, that desire was corruption, that silence was virtue. I lived by those teachings. I honored them. They made me safe." She paused, letting the truth settle. "But they did not make me whole." Her father's face crumpled just slightly. "I will not enter a covenant built on absence," she said. "Not of truth, not of self. I will not promise what I cannot give." The elders began to speak at once, protest, alarm, doctrine rising in a chorus. She did not answer them. She did not need to. She turned slowly and walked down the chapel aisle alone. No one stopped her. Outside, the bells rang again, oblivious. The village would speak of this day for years. She knew that. They would lower their voices when she passed, recast her in whispers and cautionary tales. Some would call her faithless, others would call her ruined. She accepted the cost. She walked beyond the chapel, past the gathered villagers, past the place where she had once belonged without question. Each step felt heavy, but it also felt chosen. She did not run, she did not look back. The path led her beyond the fields, beyond the hollow, toward the rise where the land opened into wide, quiet distance. The sky was clear now, washed clean by last night's rain. She did not know if he would be there. She only knew that if she did not walk forward now, she never would. At the crest of the rise, she stopped. He stood waiting, as if he had known she would come. Not cloaked, not hidden, simply there, still, restrained, human beneath the vast sky. Relief did not flood her. Peace did. "You chose," he said quietly. "Yes." She did not explain further. She did not need to. He did not reach for her. He did not move closer. He stood as he always had, honoring the space she claimed. "I will not ask what you lost," he said. "Then I will not ask what you carry," she replied. A faint smile touched his mouth. "That seems fair." They stood together in silence, the wind moving gently through the grass around them. Dragons might have slept beneath distant mountains. Legends might have stirred beyond the horizon. None of that mattered here. "What will you do?" he asked at last. She considered the question carefully. "I will learn who I am without permission," she said. "I will build a life that does not require silence to survive." "And if the world resists you?" he asked. She lifted her chin. "Then it will have to meet me as I am." Something in his expression softened, respect, unguarded and real. "You are no longer the girl they raised," he said. "No," she agreed, "but I am not lost." She stepped forward then, not into his arms, not into anything claimed or possessed. Only closer, until they stood side by side, looking out over the land. This was not an ending wrapped in certainty, it was a beginning shaped by choice. The bells rang faintly in the distance, their sound carried thin on the air, no longer commanding, just echoing. Serafina stood beneath the open sky, unbound and awake, knowing at last who she had become.